Hello, everybody. Welcome back to learn a little bit more and share a bit more about Pathform. It's great to be with the community again. So I'll kind of go and straight shoot through this and take some time for questions if there are any, or comments, or addressing any kind of comments a little bit later in the stream. So first today, I want to recap what Pathform is and kind of executive summary format. For those of you who have questions about it based on the last stream and or just to keep loading this kind of complex solution or product to understand what it is. And then after that, go into a bit about the backstory for Pathform and what led me to kind of found Pathform and what it is and what it's about. So basically, Pathform is a mission-driven application that enables human participants to unlock beneficial modes of consciousness, such as joy, compassion, bliss, confidence, groundedness, and general fundamental well-being, as well as productive creativity. So it catalyzes human potential and sparks custom growth paths in individuals and collectives, helping to bring out their unique gifts and offering support in turning them into grounded action. It'll deliver a suite of specialized AI-assisted cognitive interventions, initially via a mobile app, that will facilitate self-discovery of latent experiential spaces of consciousness. So basically, aspects and capacity of the consciousness that were there yet weren't quite tapped fully. So bringing attention to that and kind of creating a proper feedback loop so you can self-regulate and train and access those states of consciousness more fluidly and accessibly. So these interventions are integrated naturally within the participant's daily life and can be applied in various contexts, such as being seamlessly embedded in augmented reality settings or in complex urban environments, such as a smart city. So through biometrics and user feedback and interaction, Pathform will progressively crowdsource and map the specific qualitative and quantitative effects of targeted consciousness interventions, creating a Rosetta Stone between neuroscience, AI, and non-ordinary consciousness. This allows for refined data analytics services for biometrics and neurometrics, as well as opening the doors for developing new forms of brain-computer interfaces and basically redefining the entire domain of experience design across multiple industries. By integrating progressive shifts in consciousness into grounded, applied workflow, Pathform will offer supportive facilitation for the emergence of novel insights and collaborative community action that are then capable of addressing the world's most pressing issues. So it's going to basically offer a framework for delivering well-being oriented exercises and experiences via various media, and then using AI analytics to help optimize and sequence the exercises and the specific delivery multisensory information presented to each user, and then providing user guidance. This will initially be developed, provided by mobile app, and virtual and augmented reality world modes are being actively explored. The well-being exercises include targeted meditation and body awareness practices, as well as more innovative techniques, including ones leveraging biofeedback from smartphone peripherals and EEG headsets. The framework is applicable to a wide audience and is amenable to technical professionals as kind of a special subgroup. So they can then tinker with the app, and they can also be kind of receptive to the more direct approach and kind of functional approach of this. Subsequent versions of the framework will also be extended to allow creation and dissemination of properly vetted user exercises. So this isn't just a kind of a one-way street. It's kind of course, initially developing the exercises, cultivating community around that, facilitating community interaction and co-creation. And then from there, it's going to be opening up different kinds of user-created exercises. So the kind of exercises and what we're calling micro practices, which are basically interventions or exercises you can do in 30 seconds to 5 minutes. You can scatter them throughout the day and then gradually integrate them while you're working, so it becomes part of your flow. And you don't have to have this kind of opposite lifestyle just to counterbalance your existing lifestyle, if that makes sense. So it'll be kind of delivery of exercises, and then getting people together into a collaborative context where we come up with solutions in the world biggest problems, and kind of reframing the problem statements and rethinking how we even think about these things, as this is quite important with our world today. So when I speak of conscious collaboration, talking about collaborating from a place that doesn't take into account kind of our past personal histories and identities and positionalities, but rather is radically like wiping the slate clean and saying, we have the world we have in front of us. We have really complex information ecology. We have huge amounts of socioeconomic and political polarization in the world. And people's positions and positionalities are getting into stronger and stronger tensions, and tugs of war developing. And we have existential risk from runaway AI, global inequities, climate, nuclear war. All these things are due to the same core human learning disabilities over time that have been suboptimal and have gotten us to where they are today, yet are not sufficient to carry us forward into the level of into the world that we're in today, and let alone for the world of our children and our grandchildren. So a little bit of backstory. So disclaimer is that this is a self narrative. I seldom kind of think of myself really in terms of kind of a personal story anymore. It's just not kind of part of my cognitive mental consciousness framing. That said, I think there is utility in kind of describing a founder's backstory, because it's personal stories and personal journeys tell a story that is relatable in some ways, or can kind of share kind of where someone is coming from. So the purpose of this is not to kind of, get on a soapbox about myself and how special Gabriel is or whatever. It's really about sharing ways of thinking and transitions and experiences that reveal key changes and key turns in getting to this point, and basically why I feel motivated to share Pathform and to open it up to the world. So if we go back, I feel like basically I was born a scientist in a sense, biology, kind of engineering mindset early on, looking a lot at, devouring scientific textbooks and all that sort of stuff, and going through school in that way, maths and all that stuff. At 3 years old, I kind of have a clear, 3 to 4 years old, I have kind of a clear experience of light, like a light behind my awareness that was not related to my personality. And I sort of just took it for granted. I didn't really understand what it was until later. I kind of looked back and realized that after having experiences of light later in life, and kind of transcendent awareness, that I could look back to my early years, 3 to 5 years old, and there was that awareness kind of there at a very core level, even though, cognition and all the rest was not super developed at the time, of course. And so that was very much connected to heart awareness and kind of interconnection of all things. And so then, going through life at 15 years old, I had a spontaneous out-of-body experience, which was quite revealing in terms of the kinds of conditionings that our awareness has due to just being in our bodies. And so having a spontaneous out-of-body experience kind of primed me. So a few years passed by, finished high school, the whole thing. So my later teens and early 20s, when I started college, I started getting into exploring some of this stuff a little bit more. So I started kind of exploring some yoga, some meditation here and there, and then had my first experiences with psychedelics, which were a big eye opener, and sort of were kind of a key catalyst, and sort of at the time, right, um, kind of helping me kind of say, okay, what really interests me, you know, what is this show, what does this reveal that interests me? So that kind of helped me to decide to study anthropology, neuroscience, to understand human nature and where we came from and what makes us who we are, what makes us human. So around that time, I was also experimenting with the power of the mind, and I'd enjoy kind of integrating kind of some of my experiences into just other situations. So I remember distinctly going to a party where everyone had one of these plastic solo cups, in college, full of beer or vodka or whatever they had. I filled mine just full of water. And just by being around everyone that was kind of drinking and myself kind of just sipping on water, apparently it looks the same as if you're drinking, it could have just been vodka with ice or whatever. Um, I got pretty tipsy just from that. So I experienced the power of the placebo effect, and that made me realize the power of social contagion, of suggestibility, of all those kinds of things on the mind, and how legitimate and powerful that is. That it's not something separate from the brain. It is real. It is your brain. It is experience, and that conditions us all the time in life, not just in sort of altered states when you're imbibing alcohol or a drug or something like that. So that got me to where it was, and I wanted to continue studying the mind. So transitioning to neuroscience, looking at who would help me study the effects of psychedelics on the brain, on rats, and or what have you, whatever model was available to me at the time. And of course, there was some resistance. I hit the psychedelic wave a little bit early. There was not everyone really wanted to do that. It wasn't quite out in the open yet, as it is today. So I kept knocking on doors, and even through my master's degree, when I moved to the Netherlands, thinking that there'd be some open-mindedness there. That said, the funding and the interest hadn't arrived yet. So I kind of moved on from that and maintained my interest. And then later on, the wave hit. And so whoever was in school when the wave hit relatively recently, then they're in a position to kind of study that more formally. That being said, it was interesting because the psychedelic, me kind of being early to the psychedelic wave, the renaissance of psychedelics interests, was kind of a blessing for me, because I didn't kind of ride that and get distracted by that. I kind of decided to keep going and go a step beyond it. So in my early 20s, I kind of had a sort of undiagnosed, what felt to me like a depression. And I used yoga and meditation and self-care and self-regulation to basically, over the years, lift myself out of that and become aware of the mind and the mind processes, and what would lead me into a depressive state and what would get me out of it. And so I kind of use that information to help me navigate. And yeah, I tried supplements and all sorts of things like that. And it all did different things. And that said, at the end of the day, it was kind of a process of learning how the mind works and finding self-regulation tricks to help lift myself and do some healing as well, emotionally, cognitively, to help with that process. So around that time, after the psychedelics experiences I had in my early 20s, I realized that I didn't want to keep flipping the door open like a saloon door that keeps opening and closing. I wanted to walk through and take the insights and actually integrate them. And of course, in history, there are a lot of examples of this. People become monks just to be able to dedicate their lives to these things. So I thought, well, there must be some balance. So I decided to get really, really into yoga and meditation to the max. In my 20s, I became, as someone once described me, a black hole that would absorb everything. So there was no real serious treatment of altered consciousness at the time. So I basically created my own one-person university where I practiced yoga and meditated like 3 times a day. and studied in between, from morning till night. That's all I did, for a while. Fortunately, I was in a position to be able to do so, and I'm grateful for that. I learned as much as I could. I did as much yoga, posture as possible. I became a yoga instructor for a while. I got into the most bizarre poses you can imagine. Um, Legs over the head, things that take a while to do, and I was able to do them with some training. So I got to witness the plasticity of the human body and the human mind and the effect it had on me. I also got to see those communities, and I also got to see healthy ways that yoga and meditation can captivate people, and I also got to see very unhealthy ways. In the spiritual marketplace, there's a lot of fluff. There's a lot of cult dynamics, I would say, and kind of just like neoliberal self-hypnosis, just intense well-being lifestyles and attachments to false spiritual representations. And spiritualizing one's ego is actually kind of a harder way of letting go of your ego, or you can potentially accelerate that, but you have to eventually let go of the spiritual ego idea. So it could be like a temporary detour that maybe helps you get into spirituality and self-awareness. There's a lot more to let go of oftentimes. And so I learned that. Around all that time, I was quite into like understanding, still pursuing neuroscience, still pursuing anthropology, listening to thinkers like Terence McKenna. Thought it was interesting and funny and kind of bizarre all at the same time. And I kind of walked parallel paths. I walked the scientist identity, went into academia, and then also did the kind of kept that part of me alive that was quite open to like anomalies and the unexplainable, and so seeking to be able to describe it and explain it. And that kind of having a Rosetta Stone between both of those allowed me to develop the language and to be able to articulate a lot of these things in ways that I still don't really see being done today, even by folks of the best of intentions. So I'm really grateful for all those experiences and what that's taught me. So there was a realization of the importance of sense making as well. I started to travel. I started to see cultures as operating systems. I saw human biases depending on different cultures. I saw, experienced how, the landscapes and geography influences human culture and cognition. That gave me some insights into social media polarization. And as I witnessed all that through the last 7 years or so, became very appreciative of information complexity and how hard it is to do useful sense making in the world. And it was funny for me because as well, I was doing that not only at a cognitive level, but at a very personal experiential level. When I went to school, high school and elementary school, I went to kind of private schools that were either like a Catholic school early on. And then in my high school, it was all male school, right? And so during my 20s, I had to like train myself to interact with women basically. And it was funny because it was a deliberate process. So there was a lot of social understanding that I had to train myself into. It was bizarre because I enjoyed people, and that said I was mostly an introvert. So I had to learn social skills, almost like manually. And that didn't come super easy. It was like moderately okay, moderate difficulty. So that was a lot of fun. And so it was almost like I experienced the rewiring process of the human brain and the human mind, and how much someone can change if you will it into being. If you will, and you take a look at the resources and the biases in the human system and why things are the way they are to your perception, how you can galvanize and drive a change if you're fully willing to do so. So in my late 20s, I went into my PhD. I had developed a framework for consciousness and self-cultivation after experiencing different groups, different approaches experiencing things that most people would not believe are real, and just kind of questioning, did I experience what I really experienced, and what makes that real, and how do you explain that? And some things are very difficult to explain. And that said, I found a way to kind of fit them into an understanding of the mind and spirituality that I can use scientific language to describe using certain theories and kind of approaches. And that said, at the end of the day, one has to kind of dive into the water oneself and experience some of these things, because that's where it comes from. So I had finished in my late 20s some major milestones in my energetic development. I had gone through a Kundalini awakening, or a Kundalini development. Well, I was more or less born with some of that in my system already. That said, developing that in a way that I didn't use Kundalini yoga, as it's called now, that the system. I use basically a martial arts internal energy cultivation dynamic that syncretically combined principles of Taoism with some yogic and elemental and traditional Chinese stuff. And that worked wonderfully. That was quite a jarring process, because as you kind of awaken certain currents of energy in your body and in your system, they hit really hard against your internal blockages psychologically. And when that happens, there's kind of a micro traumatic release. That said, if you have a good system for smoothing it out and generating those energy currents in a clean and smooth way that integrates it with your ego personality, it doesn't have to be a rough ride. Unfortunately, most people don't know about those methods, but they do exist. And so I can highly recommend some of those approaches for sure. It helped me if anyone's going through those kinds of things. So around this time, I was really deepening the combination of my scientific understanding with my intuition understanding, and also appreciating what science yet doesn't understand, but also appreciating the value and limitations of science as we go through understanding as a society together and achieve consensus. That could be very slow. It was too slow for me to channel all my life force into saying, I want to be a scientist. And this gets us to our later point, which is existential risk is so urgent that, waiting for science to kind of solve things is an important piece of the puzzle, that it shouldn't be relied upon as the only mechanism, meaning like scientific technologies to address climate, new forms of AI that'll get us to where we want to be in AI. I mean, those are really important. That said, they're not panaceas. They're not going to fix the problem. The problem is much deeper. It has to do with human nature, how our brains are wired. So I learned a lot about how, from an experiential and a textbook and an experimental point of view, how our brains condition us to basically interpret reality in ways that are distorted, always, fundamentally. So it's really useful to find the difference between the luminosity of awareness that is just aware and it's not conditioned. It's pre-reflective. It's before you have an opportunity to reflect on your experience. There's already awareness there. It's a thing that's aware of being aware. Rather than what are the contents of awareness, the contents are completely distorted based upon personal experience, your genetic history, epigenetics, your ancestral history, your social interactions, the languages you learn and how they condition your neural development, right? So all those things are pieces of the puzzle. It's hard to recap them all in kind of just a tour of my life here. That said, those are all. If we had an AMA about any specific topic, I could easily just fire off on any of these topics. So there was a point after going through this transformation of the individual that I was kind of hitting up against the limitations of seeing things from a point of individuality, even though I had already seen past individuality quite some time ago into cosmic and transcendent awareness. I was still focused on developing myself, and those things can be very subtle and pernicious, the way that we're motivated to approach the world. So I had a breakthrough, I remember, in motivation for life. And I realized that for me personally, that I couldn't live life fully unless I expanded into the realm of the heart and compassion and lived for other people. So I couldn't, living for oneself only was like a really unfortunate and destructive illusion that I wouldn't be okay until other people were okay. And so that's when I felt a very palpable like change in life, not just a mini realization that yeah, we're all one, and then just keep going on my own personal path. That said, it was much more than that. It was about realizing what motivates consciousness from a deeper core. Consciousness is not only about fulfilling the needs and the desires of of a contained human holon or microcosm. It is much more than that. It sees no bounds. It's omniscient. It's omnipotent, and so on, and omnipresent. So it has no limitations. It's present in all nodes of consciousness in the entire hologram that is our universe. So, so then around that time, I started to get into AI and consciousness, and that's because I developed a theory that basically I more or less just saw all in a flash and wrote this theory in a week time of just typing to the keyboard as fast as I could, and took all my scientific understanding, all my intuitive understanding, and congealed it into one. And that's a paper, and it's also a presentation you can find online. It's called Causal Biomimesis, CAUSAL space BIOMIMESIS, causal biomimesis. It basically means that we're cognitively wired to kind of self-replicate ourselves, but not biologically only, but through our basically externalizing our cognition into the form of artifacts. So us building technologies and AI and stuff is no accident. It's not just like a clever idea. It's like sort of evolutionary built into our cognition to happen. So without going super into that, you can check those talks out. Just search causal biomimesis, or some of my talks on the decentralized consciousness series on Singularity Net, for example. You can search on my personal YouTube channel. I have a 15-minute talk of that I gave at Stanford University like 5 years ago, or 4 years ago. So you can check that out. That really was a game changer for me, because I realized that if we're going to be replicating ourselves based upon our self-image of ourselves, which is based on limited consciousness and the current conditions of the time, then we're going to create an external copy of ourselves that is not representative of our true abilities. And that means AI is going to be something that grows very powerful in society, institutionally, and so on. And it's not going to represent who we are or be built to support our full nature. So that had immediate ethical implications. And around that same time is when I started working with Ben Goertzel, and we co-authored some papers on AI ethics and the fusion of AI and the human mind and non-ordinary consciousness. So this was the beginning for me of understanding the ethical implications of what we are building. Everything we build, everything we do has ethical implications. And until we capture the totality of consciousness, not just from the conditioning of the human perspective, but understanding how consciousness is embedded in the intelligence of the natural world, developing ecological awareness, an extended nervous system, that we're present and aware of everything that's going on around us and our relationship to it. Until that is realized, no AI will really be good enough to govern human society or help us in a fully substantial way. So part of my thesis is we must develop human intelligence side by side, if not well before AI, because the human intelligence takes a while to make it to the engineers who are developing AI. And then the AI can then be better then, but that takes time. So that's why Pathform has a special sub-focus of going directly to engineers, because the engineers are really important in the build out of these technologies. So in my 30s, I developed kind of a framework based on science, the neuroscience degrees that I had, the research I had done, combined with the kind of experience and self-cultivation with all these different systems that I had. I got really, really well trained by exceptional practitioners who are very integrated non-dogmatic, non-culty, just like spiritual technicians and people that want to be altruistic and do good in the world and are very grounded into down to their socks and into their feet. I'm so fortunate to have met them and be seeking that out, be seeking those really, really high level, really, really high standard for self-development, to experience as much as I could, to develop as much of a synthesized awareness as possible. In my 30s is also when I started to develop more socioeconomic awareness. My spiritual discernment grew. My cult radar was very, very strong by that point. I finished school, I finished my PhD, and there was a task of translating that into work, life, family. And that's also, you know, crypto and blockchain interest was awakening. And then the desire to fuse neuroscience consciousness with the new economy grew quite strong, as you can have a lot of input from a lot of people and crowdsource intelligence and help humanity in new ways. So in the most recent past, the attention in my system has turned to addressing existential risk, fully turning to addressing existential risk and polarization in our world, because this topic encapsulates and enfolds all issues regarding sense-making, cognition, human organization, and technology and ethics. And it's sort of what my entire history personally led me to kind of learn and wrap my head around. So, and the motivation to create a better world for our children. And I use that phrase for our children deliberately, because, and it's coming from a deep place, because it's not about just me reflecting on my own family. It's about seeing raising children as a kind of an opportunity for the human being to think about the values that will support a beneficial future, and then to base those inherently on care and love. So children are like a learning opportunity, a learning mechanism of sorts in evolution, to get you to think about the future of your progeny, what values can be shared that will help this new generation deal with the complexities of our world. And if, with any luck, if you're paying attention and doing some sense making in your own life, then you know, you can pass some of that on to your kids and respect their autonomy as well, and their free will and sovereignty. So also with this shift, there's been more of a focus on working from soul and spirit and kind of the inner flame. So the more that one trusts and has faith in sort of the ground consciousness of all of reality, and that ego personality is a construction, you can keep offering more and more of your constructed personality into your inner flame. And so the soul of, I mean, this could deserve its own blog post or article or talk. The soul is basically what people refer to when they're talking to the most invariant part of themselves. So the most invariant part of yourself means the part that varies least. It is a part of you that's kind of always there, always constant, always alive, regardless of what you go through in life. It's like your inner, deepest sense of spiritual identity. Spiritual, the word, just looking at the word purely for what it is without any kind of layering culturally, it's kind of like the spirit of being alive at its most refined, distilled essence, and that part of you that's constant, always there since you were born, if not before that, and continues regardless of all the changes in your life. And it's always there like a clarion call. And in life, most people, and traditionally, culturally, either develop a spiritual lifestyle and ignore the world, or they take some wellness bits and pieces and they just chew on it. Oh, they do yoga, they go to the spa, they meditate, whatever, and they keep going about their lives, even possibly very pathological lives. In a sense, that's not necessary at all. That mostly has to do with people not having yet learned, understandably, to integrate the spiritual experiences of the higher kind of centers, the joy, the bliss, the inner calm, integrating that into action and into your legs. And that process looks different than what humans have done so far on the history of the planet. And so it's often not recognized, and it's almost even perceived as unsafe to ego and tribe from the outside. So there's an increasing faith that I've developed in the complex emergence of life, that we're not in control, and at the same time we have choice and the ability to exercise refined choice. Not believing in choice just because we know that we're not in control of everything is actually destructive to our ability to enact choice. That has been actually demonstrated scientifically. In a lab, there was a study that showed that two groups of people playing an economic game. One group, you tell them they have no free will. The other one, you tell them they have free will. The game is the exact same for both groups. The group who was told they have no free will committed more and more pathological acts economically against other players. And the other group that was told they had free will acted more beneficially and benevolently. So whether, regardless of where you stand philosophically, and we can go way into this about the neuroscience and the philosophy of free will, it doesn't matter too much whether it's in fact, how much we're in control versus how much is free. The point is, you can say free will is a useful thing to hold in your awareness and heart. It's kind of a useful illusion, if you will. I would argue it's not an illusion. That said, even if you think it's an illusion, I suggest not letting it go, because it is useful to acting more beneficially in the world. So seeing the relationship between consciousness and refinement and potential to collaborate from a more constructive and common place became more of my modus operandi. So the approach that was developed here was one of meta learning, being aware that you're learning, and everyone basically being aware that we're all learning together. And if I choose to be in a mode of learning and constant refinement and not self-judgment and just growth and evolution and creativity, and I know you are, and you are also doing that, then we can basically forgive mistakes along the way, because we're all learning and we're all devoted to that evolutionary force within us. So, and asking ourselves, like, what happens when you let all the illusions of the mind automatically resolve? If when you're looking at it from that place of humble learning and kind of invariant awareness, the soul awareness. One thing is important is being aware of positionality, tribe identity, profit maximization, and deep biases in the human system, things that have gotten us to where they are today as a human species, but are no longer useful, because we've reached a pressurization dynamic with existential risk that basically obsoletes completely using ego as a mode of learning, using tribe as a mode of learning. Tribe means any semblance of us versus them is just not going to work. Identity, positionality, meaning this is my political position, and that's kind of the end of it. You can have insights and into socioeconomic, sociopolitical reality. That said, strengthening too much a position automatically closes you to dialogue with pretty much other people, and we do need to be in a mode of conscious collaboration to address existential risk. So in a sense, that's what Pathform is uniting consciousness development with getting people in a room from a different angle, at a different vibe, to co-creatively collaborate to solve issues. And that's being done in partnership with World System Solutions, who's a fantastic organization, great at facilitating people into understanding deep biases and awareness. And that is, in the description, you can see a link to World System Solutions. On that note, I encourage everyone to hit subscribe on the YouTube channel link for Pathform, as there will be more videos coming out there in the future, and less on the Singularity Net channel over time. So if you're interested in these topics and the synthesis that we're building here, please go ahead and check that out. I think it's important to note as well that this can't be done by any one individual. This is a community effort. This requires collaboration between people and crowdsourcing information and knowledge that we can all share with each other, coming from the best place, the place of, most calm, equanimity, compassion, refined cognition. So no one is clear of positionality, tribe identity, and so on. The only antidote is to keep working on them individually, each person together, and cooperating from a place of meta learning and conscious collaboration, so that the fire is not fed. It's just naturally kind of starved of oxygen, so to speak. The fire of illusion, that is. It does take discipline, it does take courage, it takes compassion, it takes self-sovereignty, it takes collaboration consciously to do all these things. It is definitely a tall order, and that said, it's kind of like hitting at some of our most refined capabilities as human beings. And it's beautiful. It really is. It's a fusion of mind, heart, body, earth, the cosmos, and everything around us, and humanity. So I'm going to pause there and take a look at some of the questions and comments that are coming through. So thank you very much for sharing your life experiences, Marcus. My pleasure, Marcus. Thank you so much. Let me see. People who actually believe that we have no free will behave with compassion. Those who are told that others believe it but are sick behave worse. Well, depends what you're looking at. It's all belief systems, isn't it, in the end? Recognizing that you have choice in some regard, always, even if it's partly illusory, I think is something invaluable. You won't really ever be able to get rid of it. And if you try to get rid of it, you'll probably be just left looking at yourself as a machine. I'm not addressing you personally. I'm just saying in general. And that is not what we are, simply, plain and simple. So belief systems, all belief systems are something that eventually will need to go out the door. One way or another. You can either release them yourself, or you can let reality strip them from you when you die. Thinking about death and planning for death is also something that is well worth the effort. Contemplating what happens when you die. You can experience some of this in your dream. If you do good dream yoga and dream cultivation, you'll experience some of this. Also just inferring and reading accounts and understanding how awareness works and what remains. Your experiences are all relevant to learning and unlearning process and the eventual death of the ego process. How will Pathform interact with VR? Awesome question, super practical. So Pathform is basically a delivery mechanism for micro interventions and micro practices. The more multimodal and multisensory that you can get with that, the more immersive you can get with that, the more effective that can be. So imagine mind-body practices being delivered in the form of virtual reality, where there's more influence on the various senses and the timing based on the science of bodily self-consciousness, which is basically my background academically. And so if you are in an immersive environment, the effect is greater. That's the short answer. So from a practical standpoint, that also means developing a VR application or developing an SDK or API that will integrate into augmented and virtual environments. So this could be an urban environment, smart city environment where people are delivered augmented reality experiences that are seamless with their environment, and the people may kind of be aware that their well-being and consciousness is being cultivated. That said, you can play with the properties of stimuli in a way that subtly influences cognition in a beneficial way. And it's very, very important to do this from a beneficial, altruistic standpoint, because you could easily take this science and manipulate it into doing, to kind of hypnotizing people into just buying more shit, basically. Or hypnotizing people towards just enslaving themselves in some bizarre closed world that has nothing to do with their higher consciousness. So these things are hard to commit to in the world that's driven by profit and greed, and that said, they're really important. And someone's got to fight. Someone's got to support and nurture this aspect of humankind. Spirit, quote unquote, is definitely a thing. Life has some unknown force that leads it to metabolize. Yes. So this is an interesting point. Sometimes words, when they're used over time, accumulate on top of them the cultural baggage and interpretation. So when you hear a word like spirituality, or whatever it is, any word that connotes like a cultural thing, a human thing. It can, when you hear the word, it'll also, your brain will light up with the way people interpret the word and the way the word, what the word means to other people. It's really important to be aware of the difference between the two, and you can take the whole thing and kind of like slice out the part that's really useful for you, and then keep the part that makes the most sense. So the word spirit is just really connoting the kind of pneuma, or spirit, the breath of life, so to speak, in life, that supports life and everything else. And there's something about that you can't erase from just the human lexicon and experience. And then people talk about spirituality, and then when you look up spirituality, you see images of people buying yoga mats and you know super slim bodies and all that stuff, and that is cultural. That is all learned and social constructs. But spirit, at its very core, is undeniably a fact of experience. And if you haven't experienced that, that's totally okay. It's like gravity, it's kind of there. And so it's just about guiding awareness through practices to finding it and tapping that wellspring yourself and seeing what it means for your life. And part of Pathform is people discovering their own growth paths and seeing where that leads them, right? And then seeing how we can work together. So it's kind of, it supports the individual variation of how people's life paths and what's good for them, and kind of respecting of their sovereignty and so on. So I think that's important. It gives people more room to breathe, freedom to explore, and introduces more diversity into the spiritual, into the spiritually manifest in the world. I don't think, one comment, I don't think people could actually follow through and abandon all forms of tribalism. It is a tall order. It really is. It does begin gradually though. And every little chunk you cut off that erodes with practice and time and effort makes a big difference. So it's one of those things that when we think about it all or nothing, like, oh, climate, oh, AI, oh, greed and politics, and our world is screwed, and then you become cynical. The cynicism and jadedness is like the first kind of like a halfway house, it's like existentialism. It's sort of like the halfway house to a greater realization. It's like you realize that things are kind of messed up to the degree that they are, that there is zero-sum economics, gamesmanship, and everything. People are vying for your attention. Every time you're presented with something, if you just ask yourself, what's the motivation of someone presenting this to me? You get into the world of marketing and advertising, you realize people are just trying to basically, get your money in some way. And so all these things can lead to deep cynicism. And that said, it is part of the human spirit as well to kind of keep going and persevering. So there are ways to solve tribalism. Those will be shared in due course. So again, subscribe to the Pathform channel. There's a Telegram also down in the description. All that will come in due course. We're at very early days now. So can Pathform treat PTSD? I have it. So we're definitely going to have to be careful with languaging, right? Because I can never say my product or my thing or anything that isn't medically licensed treats or cures any kind of medical thing. PTSD is just legally, it's not wise for anyone to make that claim. You should always consult with your doctor, right? There's always that. And on top of that, you can pursue self-regulation of training in yourself that helps you to deal and cope with what's there. For PTSD, I would suggest checking out something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization, rapid desensitization or movement. I forgot, EMDR. There's ways of doing that. You move your eyes in a way that, as you recall a kind of a traumatic event, that helps you kind of process it out of your system. So that deserves its own proper treatment. That's what I thought I'd mention that now. So in terms of dealing with crystallized emotions and stuck mini traumas that we all have, Pathform will offer practices for all those things, yes. And there's two approaches that I discovered over the past, over a decade or now, which is that to the mind and into healing and expansion and kind of the process of healing in general, whether it's just cognitively, emotionally, or spiritually, two sides of that coin are expansion and evoking expansive states where you feel bigger and more expansive and connected to big emotions like wonder, joy, awe, etc. And the other side of it is actually refining and cleaning up the stuff that's underneath. The more that you pack your bags with positive, expansive energy, the more that you'll be able to dig deeper. So both of those things will be important, and they'll be covered in due course. Let's see. Did I hear you correctly last time with eyes on 2025 for the singularity, early or late 2025? I didn't quite say the singularity. I did say AGI, beneficial AGI. I think that is seed AGI, right? I think that's a good target. And I think looking at, regardless of the technological outcomes, the next 4 years are huge for us. We're in such a pressurization dynamic right now that it's so key and core to the resolution of existential risk, in particular climate change, which really is due to human learning disabilities more than anything. We're at a precipice. Humankind is at a precipice right now, not just for the species but for the planet. And I think owning and taking that on as part of one's life is a beautiful thing in whatever way one can. And it's not all or nothing, you know, it's a progressive process. So yeah, the singularity has many definitions, and I won't go super into that, but just worth mentioning. Let me see. Someone made a comment about, you know, the process of war and kind of quote blaming humans for war when it's actually just 1%. No, that's not true. I would argue. I disagree. And the reason for that is, although your sentiment is I would agree with the sentiment itself. Like, yes, there is an imbalance in human power, and so there are certain people in power that then affect, you know, the power dynamics. Humans are like very similar. There is a Hitler in every human, so to speak. And if you're put in certain situations and you are not fully conscious of your own unconscious dynamics, you will also pull the trigger on some deadly weapon. And it's even to people unconsciously even have the best motivations that as long as we're the ones building this technology, as long as we're the ones pulling the trigger on the nuke, it's okay. I mean, that is built on such deep human bias. So I would say the core biases of humans will lead to different outcomes. The tribalism, the ego, will all lead to different outcomes depending on what situation the person is in. If the person is working kind of a street level job, let's say, versus being a billionaire on a yacht, or whether they're a politician in power, what degree of corruption they have, the outcomes will be different, but the learning disabilities are all the same. So even that kind of separation of saying, oh, only those people are capable of that and we're not capable of that, I would argue is a not optimal, not beneficial way of addressing the crisis we're in. It doesn't support conscious collaboration. And at the end of the day, to solve a human crisis we're in is going to require interaction with both decentralized ways, decentralized solutions, and solutions that are acting on centralized power players. All those people are important. Everyone is important for the future of our planet because everyone has a stake in it. So we don't need tribalism 2.0, 3.0, a more refined, a better form of tribalism. Like, oh, we're better than them. That's not what we need right now. That's continuing to kill us at an everyday level. You know why? Because they think the same thing about us. So there, it cancels itself out. That's not going to be useful. Just to be very direct, and I'm not singling you out. I'm just mentioning this as a general thing because it's an easy human trap. Tribalism is super, super, super subtle and super pernicious. It's not just people painting themselves in paint and chanting. That's not what tribes are. Tribalism is everything that leads to any kind of subtle in-group, out-group dynamic of any kind, us versus them. So Well, I think that's a good place to pause. We've hit the hour, I think, almost at the hour. So thank you everybody for participating in this. It's been fun. Um, and the next time I'm going to show you the next talk, I'm going to share some more information about Pathform as a what it is. So shifting from backstory a little bit to kind of showing you a bit about Pathform features and all that sort of stuff, kind of more practical. Hey, there's Ibby, Queen Ibby on the YouTube feeds. Yeah, the us versus them, the constructs of tribalism in society, they're huge. All this is going to have the way that we do conscious collaboration and infusing consciousness practices and everyone kind of developing their own paths is going to radically change governance in society, in wherever it takes root first. First, it's going to be in this decentralized community we all have. So that's awesome. That said, imagine the modes of governance that could come out of this, the kind of decision making, the approaches that are coming from a different place. And this is a co-creation, co-creative, co-discovery process that we're all in together. No one person really has the answer. Everyone is kind of like a distributed node of knowledge and experience collecting information for the hive, and then the hive prospers because of that. All right, cool. Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ibby. Thank you, Mac. Thank you, everybody. That was fun. So till next time, everyone, have a great rest of your day, evening. And again, follow Pathform on socials. All the links are below. Check those out and see you next time.